All right, said we are continuing on in our core series that we've been going through for the last several weeks, and what we're doing is we're kind of walking through the message, or what's called the Sermon on the Mount, that's found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And it was Jesus's, when he went to new territories, this seemed to be like the things he would teach everywhere he went, and so it's kind of the core teachings of Jesus, the core teachings of what God wants us to know about our lives and how to interact and view the world. And so what he tries to do, is the best way I've been able to describe it, is he's trying to take off the lenses that you're wearing that the world gives you, of how you view the world, how you interact with that world, how you interpret what's happening in the world, and how you go about finding the fulfillment of your desires. And he's going, take those lenses off, and I'm going to give you the real lenses. I'm going to give you the real lenses that actually will lead to the fulfillment of your desires. Because all the lenses the world gives you, they are counterfeit. They will not lead you to the end goal you're looking for. It's only if you view life the way I tell you to view it, and interpret things the way I'm telling you how to interpret it, that you will actually find true fulfillment, that you will find real happiness, you will find lasting joy in your life, and you will find eternal purpose in your life. But you have to look through life through his lenses. You got to see life the way he sees it. So today we're going to go through the next part of the Sermon on the Mount. So we just kind of take a section each week and a topic each week. This week we're going to deal with the topic of divorce, okay? And what is biblical divorce, what's acceptable divorce in God's eyes, and we're going to look at that. We're going to start by just reading the text. In Matthew chapter 5, it's verses 31 and 32, so it'll be on the screen if you want to read along as I go. And you'll see there, up there, if you go to it, I put female focused, because you're going to hear the language in this one seems to be aimed more towards the wife or the female of the relationship. You're going to find other ones, you'll see I put male focused, where it covers, this is kind of like male focused. So he kind of covers all the bases on this one. But this part talks about the wife's role and where she is in the relationship and divorce. It says this: you have heard the law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. So what he's saying, he's talking to Jewish teachers and all. He's like, you guys all know the saying, which is you can just write out a reason why you divorce your wife, and you can give it to her, and you can divorce your wife. Okay? And he says, but say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. Okay? So this passage that we're going to look at today, it's very confusing. Most people don't fully understand what God's teaching is on divorce and all for Christian people. It's pretty clear, actually, when you start studying the scriptures. It's just for some reason people don't clearly state it. So I'm going to give you that today. So the first thing we got to look at, though, is what is marriage? And so what we have to first do is this. You have to throw out all of your cultural understanding, all of your governmental understanding, your personal views about marriage and divorce. Throw them to the side, because we're going to go back to the basics. We're going to strip everything away, and we're going to look at what is it that God actually desires from us in marriage. What is marriage to him, and what does he desire in the sense of divorce? Okay? Strip everything you think you know away, everything culturally that you've already accepted, throw it aside, and we're going to look at what the Creator actually says. In Matthew 19, through 8, here's what it says. Kind of a long passage, but this is Jesus speaking as well. He says this: some Pharisees came and tried to trap him in a question. So they're trying to trap Jesus in a question. And it says, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Okay? And he says, haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. They, the beginning, God made them male and female. And that's from Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. He says, and he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and joined to his wife, and the two are united into one, which comes from Genesis 2, 20, 24. So these are from the very beginning of the text of the Bible. You have it laid out right from the start. One of the deals with is marriage and that relationship. Verse 6, it says, no longer two, but one. Let no one split apart what God has joined together. Then he goes on, he says, it says, why did Moses law that a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away, which is Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. So religious leaders are, well, if that's what marriage is, Jesus, and he doesn't want divorce, why did Moses say you could divorce? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts. What God had originally intended. Okay? So Jesus is going, God let Moses give that command, but that's not what God intended. But because of your hard hearts, that's kind of where it ended up. Okay? So once again, men messed up God's perfect design. Then we had to come up with different stuff to deal with our mess ups. Okay? But that was originally intended. So here's what we see from Jesus, who is speaking as God because he is God. So it's God himself says that marriage, what it is, it's one man, it's one woman who become one in the eyes of God through marriage that is submitted through sex. Okay? That is what marriage is. So it's one man, one woman. They are united and they become one in God's eyes. And it's cemented through the sexual relationship. God intended a couple to stay linked together of one of the individuals of that. That was his desire. That was his original design. That's all we know about marriage. Pretty simple, not too complicated to get, which is God went, okay, you're supposed to come together. Now I view you as one, not as two different. I view you as one, and stay together until one of you passes away. That's what the sign was. Okay, it's nothing more complicated than that. But we also have to look at this then. There is divorce, and it's talked about in the scriptures, and Jesus talks about it. So we need to look at what are righteous reasons. And when I say righteous reasons, what I mean by that are things approved by God, or that God goes, okay, I get it. This is approved by God for divorcing your spouse. Here's what it says in Matthew 19:9, and this is where I put male focus, because now this one's male focus. And I tell you this, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery, unless his wife has been unfaithful. Okay? So this passage perfectly lines up with Jesus' words on the but it was female focus there. Now he's talking about in a male focus. The one and only reason we find it in the scriptures for divorcing your spouse, if you're a Christian, okay, is that they have sex with someone else. That's one reason that we see in the scripture for a godly reason. That's it. Nothing more to really understand. Because of cultural influences, it's not so simple. Because if I were to ask you, we could come up with 30 other reasons why it's justified to actually divorce your spouse, and we could give all sorts of reasons why we think it is, and why this is a good reason, and why this is justified. So we come up with all these things, but what I want you to understand is this. In God's eyes, there's one reason. It's it. There is no other reasons, and if you want to be obedient, what God says, which is for Christians, the only reason for divorce is your wife, someone else. So that is the basic teachings, the biblical teachings of marriage and divorce. Now, what we have to do then is this. There are other issues that we see in the scriptures about marriage and divorce that we're going to address because we have to, and they're there to help us get even a more well-rounded view of this. Okay? So first thing we're going to look at is this. What is all the talk here about committing adultery with someone that's been divorced? So this is what confuses a lot of people is they read this and go, so if I marry someone that's been divorced, I'm committing adultery when I marry them or I have sex with them and cement that marriage. People are like, how does that work? What's that mean? Let me explain it to you, okay? I'm going to read you two more passages. They already link with two that we've read, but two more that just kind of cement this thing that this is what Jesus' feel is. Luke 16, he says, for example, if a man who divorces his wife and marries someone else a man who divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery. And anyone who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. Mark 10, it says this, and if a woman divorces her husband and marries someone else, she commits adultery. Okay? So people get very confused on this, but let me help you what he is saying here. He's saying this. What we're seeing is marriage is still in God's eyes even if you have divorced legally with the laws of your land, as long as the sexual bond has not been broken by one party or the other. Okay? So what God and what Jesus is trying to communicate to us is, if you still have the sexual bond pure, you can go get a legal divorce, you can say you're divorced and all that stuff, but in God's eyes, you're still married. You're still one, you're still linked. So even if society doesn't see it that way, that's exactly how God sees it, okay? So if you divorce your spouse, but the bond has not been broken through sex, you are still one. So whoever breaks that marriage bond by having sex with someone else is guilty of committing adultery, okay? Maybe not in the world's eyes, but in God's eyes. So let me help you understand this. You have a husband and you have a wife. They're together, they're one in God's eyes. Say they divorce legally, but no one has stepped outside the marriage bond of sexual relations with anyone else. So legally, they go, I'm legally fine, I'm separate, I can do my own thing because I'm divorced. But in God's eyes, he's going, no, you're still one. So when he talks about here, if you marry a divorced woman or a divorced man, you're committing adultery, what he's saying is this. In God's eyes, they're still one. So now they're living as they're separate. And let's say the husband goes off and he marries another woman and starts having sexual relations with her. He has now broke this marriage bond. Therefore, he's committing adultery. Does that make sense? Do we get that? Okay, let me continue on because I'm not getting any head nods. Let me put it the other way. So you have a married couple. They divorce legally, but no one has had sex outside that marriage. And the wife gets a new boyfriend, and she goes and gets married, and she starts having sex with this guy, and this partner has not. She is now committing adultery, and the person sleeping with her is committing adultery. So now this is the one that's guilty of breaking God's marriage bond that was together. Do we get this? I need head nods, or I'm going to keep going over this over and over again. You're going to hear it. We got it? Okay. So all this talk here where he's talking about if you marry a divorced person or whatever, you commit adultery, is he's going, by marrying them, implying you're having sex with them. By marrying them or having relations with them, you're committing adultery on an original marriage that was not broke. Therefore, you are committing adultery. That's what he's trying to set out there, okay? So that's what all those scriptures mean. Now, the next question we have to ask is this. So does that mean if you are married to someone and they do not cheat on you sexually, that you are stuck with them no matter the circumstances? So does that mean my husband's faithful to me sexually or my wife's faithful to me sexually, but it's miserable being with them? Are you stuck with them forever? Okay? The way to answer that, the best way I could say is yes and no. So you might be asking yourself, well, I get physically abused. Am I trapped? I'm emotionally abused. Am I trapped? They lack to provide for the family. Am I trapped in that? Do I have no options? They're deprived. They're involved in stuff I can't agree with, and they have deprived my in that marriage. Am I stuck? And I'd say yes and no. 1 Corinthians says it this way, chapter 7, 10 and 11. It says, but for those who are married, I have a command that comes not from me, but from who? The Lord. So he's going, this isn't even from me. This is God's telling me this is his command. He says, a wife must not leave her husband, or you could turn it the other way, a husband must not leave his wife, but if she does leave him, let her remain single, or else be reconciled to him. And a husband must not leave his wife. Okay? So now what we're seeing here is this option of separation that God has kind of given us to go, you're not necessarily trapped in an abusive marriage or a psychologically abusive marriage or someone that lacks to provide or they're deprived of it. You're not trapped in that sense. There is this option of separation. And what separation is, it's remaining married but distance from your spouse. Okay, so we're still in God's eyes one. I'm not free just to go find someone else to be my husband or wife. We're still one, but we are physically getting away from each other. So what that means is this. If you or your kids are being physically abused, get out. Get out of that marriage situation where you're living together. Safety, separate, and get someplace safe. Okay? You get out of that. If you or your kids are being emotionally, get out. Okay? Separate out. Get physical distance between the two of you and separate out. That's not healthy for you or the spouse. Either one of you, nothing healthy is happening in those situations. I would say this: if your spouse refuses to provide for your family, this is typically, but not always, typically aimed more at the husband. But if you have a husband who refuses to provide for the family, who refuses to get a job and work for the family, trying to provide for the family, I would say separation might be an option. To make a point, this is unacceptable. If your spouse is continually involved in activities that you can't support, I would say separation might be an option. In order to get through their heads, this can't continue on this way. This isn't healthy. Not healthy for me. We're going to get distance between us to let you know this is a major issue. Okay, that might be an option. But you have to understand what the ultimate purpose of separation is, and that is to bring healing and health back to a marriage. Okay, that is what that tool is for, is to bring healing and health back to a marriage. A lot of people, Christians, separation as, well, it's my first step to divorce. So I'm going to take that will get me to divorce, and it's kind of my first step getting there. And you're like, no. That's not what the intent of it was. If you go back and look at the scriptures, it says, but if she does leave him, let her remain single, or else be reconciled to him. So it seemed to be a tool to try to get some health back into the marriage, to get some healing back into the marriage. Now, here's what would be said. If that can't happen, so if healing and health can't be restored, and you try to, if you've got an abusive spouse, go, I'm not coming back to you until the abuse stops and you prove the abuse will never happen again. I'm not coming back. I'm living on my own, but I'm not coming back to you. Emotionally abusive. I'm not coming back in that situation. I'm not going to be talking to you on the phone and having long conversations if every time you're still manipulating me, abusing me with your words. I'm done with that, and I will stay over here until this is fixed. If it can't be fixed, what it tells you to do is stay single. Okay? And what that means is this: you are still called to be sexually faithful to that marriage bond. That means in your separation, you're not searching out for a new spouse. You're not looking for some new love interest. You're not trying to be fulfilled by some other person of the opposite sex. You are now single, and you're on your own, but you are still one in God's eyes. Okay? Now, what typically happens there is this. Just because I've seen this multiple billion, trillion times. When that separation happens and things can't be fixed, typically the spouse who has been separated from eventually goes off and finds someone else. And at that point, what we would then go is, now they've committed adultery. Now I'm free from this marriage bond if I choose to be. Okay, so now they have went and cheated. Now they are with somebody else. They have broken our sexual marriage covenant. We are no longer one, and they have broken after adultery. Now I am free to pursue a different path in life with the option of someone else. Does that make sense? That's the teaching that we see in the scriptures of divorce, how to handle major issues in marriage, is we are to try to heal it. We are trying to bring health back to it, and we can use a tool of separation. But divorce is never called for unless adultery has happened. Now let me say this real quick. If adultery has happened, that doesn't mean God tells you you must divorce your spouse. Okay? There are relationships where adultery happens and there is unity brought back, there's healing and there's health brought back to a marriage. All praise to God. Because that would be hard for me to figure out how you do that. But praise God that some people can, and God can bring healing in that. So as a minister, if you ask me, Scott, should I divorce someone? I can honestly tell you this. I have never, ever told anybody to get divorced. Okay? Because I know God's original design was not for that. So I am never going to say, yep, go divorce them. If you tell me your spouse has cheated on you sexually, I would tell you, you have perfect right to leave your spouse, to divorce them. We see that in Scripture. That is an option, and if that's an option you choose, you're making a godly decision there, and that's a choice that you've been given. I do suggest, and I have suggested, separation multiple times, where people have come in, they've talked to me, and I come out of that, and I will tell them, you need to get away from that spouse. Like, you need to separate. You need to go find someplace safe to be. You need to get out of that relationship, and you need to be on your own with your kids where you can be protected and leave him behind right now, and you can work at a distance, seeing if there's some way this can be healed and brought back together. But if it can't, you keep yourself safe, because that's the priority. Never offer divorce as a solution, but I will offer separation because I believe it's a very useful tool. And a lot of times, the messed up party destroying your marriage. And then God would go, you're due, and you need to move on with your life in a new direction. Okay? So let me recap. Divorce. First thing is this. When you get married, you are considered as one person with your spouse in God's eyes. That's how God views you at that point. Complicating part of this one, I don't want to open this can of worms. It's something to think about. That can go to basically if you have sex with someone, because it seems like the scriptures are implying it's through that you are unified as one person, which goes into our culture now, why sex has such huge consequences to us if we have multiple partners and just use it as a little side thing. That's just part of our life, of why it messes people up so much and causes so much degrading of your self-worth and stuff like that, is because it's such a bond that happens between two people. What happens is this: if you use it outside the context that God designed sex to be used in, the significance of it becomes less and less and less, because you become more emotionally dead to that area of your life. Hard to get some of that back, because you have to kill parts of it to continue to. And we see that a ton in our society today. But what we do see is marriage cemented in sex, you become one. Okay? Next thing we see is divorce is unacceptable unless one partner commits adultery. This is for us as Christians. The world does whatever the world does. This is us. Third thing is, as long as sexual faithfulness is maintained, the marriage union is still in place no matter what legal things have happened, no matter what you see in society. In God's eyes, that's the submitting factor, is the sexual relationship. The last thing, separation is a useful tool to try to save a marriage that is terminally ill. And the best way I would help you to understand it and see it is chemotherapy. You get a diagnosis, you have cancer, something that can kill you, something that's very dangerous, it's very sick in you. You use chemotherapy, that hurts you even more, but it's to bring you to a healthy spot down the road. That's the best way I would see separation, is kind of like that chemotherapy thing is. It's not pretty. Nobody wants to have to use it, but there are times that if you don't use it, people die. And so you have to use it to bring health down the road, at least give the chance of health down the road. Okay? That's the main teachings we see in the scriptures of marriage and divorce. It's not super complicated. We just don't like to hear it a lot of times, depending on where we are in our lives. The last thing I want to do is just conclude by reading to you from Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. And this is what the author of Hebrews says. He says, "Give honor to marriage and remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery." Here's what I want you to understand. We as Christians, we need to honor the institution of marriage, and we need to have a proper respect for the institution of marriage. We cannot change the world around us, okay? The laws of our land are the laws of our land. The way people perceive it in our culture, the way people perceive it in our culture, the way the Jews had set it up and started to perceive it amongst themselves is the way the Jews have perceived it and started to set it up. And Jesus comes in and goes, I don't care about any of that. I'm going to tell you what I want. I'm going to tell you what the Creator designed and what His desire is. So we cannot change the world, but we can change ourselves. We can make sure that we are being the people that God has called us to be. Godly marriages are the foundation of a healthy. As marriages break down, you can also see societies break down. As godly marriages go out the window, you can see society start to go out the window. You can see everything start to break apart. It's through godly marriages. Children are given the best chance to thrive. I didn't say the only chance. I'm just saying it's the best chance for children to thrive. And it's through godly marriages that spouses are given the best chance to find full fulfillment in your lives. Not saying you will, not saying it's the only option. I'm saying it's the best. It's the best way you can find fulfillment in your life as a spouse is through a God-honoring, loving marriage. Okay? Marriage isn't easy. And here's the thing. Nothing worthwhile in this life ever will be. If something is easy, it's a ripoff. If something is easy, it's a counterfeit that's only helping you for a few moments. It's not going to help you long term. You might think it will, but it never does. It's just counterfeits. It's the lenses the world offers us. So marriage isn't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But marriage does take a few things. It takes hard work. Okay? You have to work hard at it. Trust me, in my marriage, me and my wife have to work hard at it. Okay? Because we are polar opposites in everything. My leadership knows this. Most of you know this. If you just know both of us, you know it takes a lot of work for us to have a healthy marriage. It takes forgiveness. Okay, so hard work, it takes forgiveness. It takes compromise. It takes a lot of faith of trusting God's ways over my own desires. It takes perseverance. And I would say most of all, it takes commitment. The commitment part is, and this is why I always tell my wife, and I am not the ideal spouse no matter what you think. I know most of you think I am the perfect husband, okay? But one of the things that has always bugged my wife a little bit is I do not have emotions the way most people have. Don't laugh too much, okay? So I've always told her when she's like, do you love me? And what is love? I'll always be like, dude, love is this on my finger. To me, my love for her, I don't have deep emotional love. Man, it's going to make me sound bad. Do I keep saying this? Okay, you know what? No, I'm saying it because here's the thing. We need to understand we're all different people, and some people are different. That's okay, and we're all different. So I'm not going to give you the spiel that everybody hears. I love my kids. Probably not the way some of you might love your kids. I don't have like a deep emotional connection where I'm like, ooh, Gideon's never had me like, ooh, yeah, I beat you up. I mess with you. That's my way of showing love is all that. I will tell you this. I would do anything for him. And the reason I am faithful to my wife is because of this ring. Okay? Because I made a commitment, and my commitments are bigger than my emotion. And so it's been hard for her to understand because I say I have that's more than if I have an emotional attachment to you. Because to me, this is everything. Just I will be faithful to you. I will never be with another woman as long as you live. I will never them because that will never happen because I made a commitment to you, and my commitment cement when I make them. Okay? That's how I love my wife. That's how my relationship works. Now, my wife tries to love me emotionally, but I'm dead. So then it just causes some issues. But we try the best we can, and we try to make it all work out. And everything overall goes pretty well. And we've got 2 decently well-rounded kids so far. As I always say, they could blow up and become disasters. But who knows? We'll see that in time. We just keep watching them and seeing. Gideon's getting closer because he's at TU, and you just know he's going to blow up at some point. But right now he's doing okay. Okay? So I'm just going to end it with this because I went off on a whole thing there. Just remember, the number one thing in marriage, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, commitment. You are one in God's eyes, and you are that way until one of you dies or someone blows it up by cheating sexually in that marriage. Okay? That is who we are called to be. I don't care what the world says. I don't even care what your emotions say or what your desires are, because none of it matters, because the designer says this is the way it gets done, and this will be best for you if you follow my view of things. This is what's best for the world. It's for everything if you would just follow my design. Stop corrupting it. Let's pray. Heavenly Father,